Thank you all for joining. Hopefully you got a chance to grab a sample of the bread and different treats out front, courtesy of Barrio Bread and Desert Sonoran Foods. My name is Jason Franz. I am the Assistant Director of Marketing and Communications here at the Biodesign Institute, and it's my pleasure to have this panel here today. This really originated from the work that Ramon Velazquez has been doing around pesticides and working with different agriculturalists and food creators. And it just so happened that as he was talking about one of his projects through the Lab Coat Optional podcast, everybody subscribe, that he happened to drop that he was working with Barrio Bread, which made me pause because I have been familiar with Don Guerra from Barrio Bread since its inception and long before. And so it kind of made some things kind of tick off of, we got to have a little conversation here, and we've been able to kind of build it out into this. So in 1825, French gastronome Jean-Anthelme Briot-Savarin wrote, "Tell me what you eat, and I will tell you who you are." Today, as you're going to hear from these folks, this phrase probably would be more appropriate if it was, "Tell me where your food comes from, and I'll tell you what you will become." Today's panel features a farmer, a baker, a food policy scientist, and a neurological health scientist, and they're going to weave their insights and experiences together to help us better understand why there's a movement back towards organic methods, using heritage grains and indigenous practices, so we can course correct what decades of mass-produced food has done to our system. So start with some introductions. We have Matt Vanderhart. He is the head of marketing, sales, and logistics of Desert Sonoran Natural Foods and is a sixth-generation Arizona farmer. He and his wife are currently raising the seventh generation of their farmers in their family. They own and operate two businesses, and Matt is partners in two others. His business mission is to provide the shortest and most efficient food chain possible and have those products be natural and healthy to promote a good lifestyle and, in some cases, heal the person seated at the table. Next in, we have Don Guerra. Don is a James Beard Award-winning baker and founder of Barrio Bread in Tucson and Barrio Bagel and Slice here in Gilbert. They just celebrated their one-year anniversary, so congratulations for that. Don's career has evolved from working in a storefront bakery in Flagstaff to being a primary education teacher, PE, I believe it was, wasn't it? Yeah. And then starting his own bakery out of his garage 17 years ago to now his current operations. He continues to prioritize educating bakers and the public around quality and about quality foods and the importance of heritage grains. And most recently, Don joined the ASU School of Transporter Studies as its baker in residence. Next on, we have Sara El-Sayed. Sara is a senior global futures scientist and assistant research professor with the Swette Center for Sustainable Food Systems. She's also the director of the ASU Biomimicry Center. Sara earned her PhD in sustainable food systems here at ASU and has co-founded a number of enterprises in Egypt, including Nawaya. Did I get that right? Nawaya? Which works as a catalyst to transition small-scale farmer communities into more sustainable ones through education and research. And then next to me, we have Ramon Velazquez. He is an assistant professor here at the Biodesign Institute in the ASU-Banner Neurological Disease Research Center. He also holds an academic appointment with the School of Life Sciences. His research focuses on identifying pathogenic mechanisms in the neurodegenerative process resulting from environmental factors. And currently, as I had mentioned, he's been working with Don and colleagues at TGen to explore risks from the herbicide glyphosate in our food. So welcome to our panel. Thank you for joining us. Ramon, I want to start with you. Thank you. Can you kind of bottom line this for us? Why do we need to have this conversation? Why are each of you doing the work you're doing? Why does this topic matter in terms of our personal wellness?
All right. So first of all, thank you for organizing this great event. I think it's very important to get together, folks from all over the realm in terms of what we do, to really highlight, this important conversation around what we eat and the effects that this can have on what we focus on, which is brain function, right? So, what we started to try to understand a few years ago through these projects is what is it out there in the environment that may be leading to increased prevalence of many of these disorders that we're seeing, such as Alzheimer's disease. And we actually started off, actually a graduate student of mine who came to my office and said, there's this really interesting correlation showing that glyphosate exposure, which is a pesticide, one of the most widely used pesticides in the world and in the United States, about 330 million pounds used every year. There's correlations with Alzheimer's disease risks and deaths. And I told the grad student, well, that's a correlation. We can't really make much of this, right? But it probably warrants looking more into this, right? So as we did more work, we found that this pesticide and others haven't really been explored in the realm of what they can do to the brain, or can they even get into the brain. So that's kind of the work that inspired us to look at this in animal models, given the fact that a lot of the data that is used to make the policies on what is acceptable in terms of exposure relies on. It's usually comes through animal models. We can't expose humans to a pesticide and say, let's look at what happens to their brain, obviously, right? And what we found, this was a collaboration with TGen, is that this pesticide glyphosate actually did have the ability to penetrate the brain, get into the brain, and induce what's known as inflammation, which we know is a signature of many of these neurodegenerative disorders. And what we found further with further work is that it also exacerbated aspects of Alzheimer's disease pathology, these sticky plaques that you find in the brains of individuals that have this disorder. And we also found deficits in cognition. So that kind of led us to believe there's something going on here in terms of these pesticides doing something in the brain. And that has led to many, many different projects that we're currently undertaking, to the point that we're now working with a consortium out of DC that's trying to look at these pesticides, glyphosate and other pesticides, given the fact that there's so many of them being used. And in particular, in spots where you see their use is heavy, you tend to also see that there's more incidence of disorders like Alzheimer's disease. So that's critical and important. And in my lab, and what we do here at ASU at the Neurodegenerative Disease Research Center, is try to understand what's happening mechanistically. Because one of the problems is, and what happens with a lot of these organizations that say, well, these pesticides are fine, they're not really harmful, is that they'll say, that's all correlational data, right? Just because you live around an area that has exposure to these things doesn't mean that they're actually causing these things. But when you have that mechanistic data to highlight that causal data, it starts to really open the question. These are actually potentially contributing to the increased prevalence of these disorders that we see.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So with that in mind, Sara, can you kind of take us back a little bit from a historical perspective, considering indigenous practices, federal imposed health standards that we're now dealing with? What is the value of organic farming using heritage foods?
All right, first of all, again, thank you for inviting me. I wouldn't say I'm a policy person. I'm more of a sustainability and cultural anthropologist. That's kind of my background. I am working as a, in the part of, in the Swette Center on policy aspects. So I'm gonna try and unpack a lot of these big pieces. So I do have my notes to remember some of the stuff. But just to start with, when we talk about heritage or ancestral grains, or in the case of this, but in general, ancestral foods, these are usually crops, products that have been preserved and passed down for generations. They are not something that is just found here. This is a global phenomenon across the world. They're usually, seeds, products. And in many cases, for some people, for some communities, these are considered more than just a commodity. They're akin. They are often not sold, but shared. And it really meshes in with not just the health of people, but their well-being and the cultural ceremonies, practices. And so, there's many stories of West African slaves that came, into the Americas with seeds braided into the hairs of women to make sure that they can preserve their okras and rices and things like that. And so they're really connected to people's way of life. And in a way, I would say that they are the most co-evolved, right? Like they evolved with people. They've been around for generations. They've been iterated with. People are planting different crops in different places. And so they become really most adapted to these different places. in the example of some of the varieties that you are growing, like the white Sonora most probably came from where I'm from North Africa, moved with the Jesuits as they were coming across. I think Father Kino is the person who brought it as a way to make communion. They wanted to, to make sure that there was a wheat variety. And then it started making like the best tortilla, I guess, like for the native communities that were here. It's also supposedly like, again, we want more research, but for people who are gluten intolerant, there's people who are saying that it doesn't have the same kind of effect as other flours. But in that kind of context, you have a lot of communities that are working towards preserving some of these important grains, important crops. So in the United States, on Turtle Island, as the Anishinaabe like to talk about it, there's a movement of rematriation, and this idea of not patriation, but using women who are the original seed holders, moving seeds back to the communities so that they can reclaim some of this kind of heritage. And this is kind of like in the indigenous space, but it's also, we can see it happening with the work that Dawn and Matt are doing, where you're creating a local economy as well with these heritage grains. I really like the experience of this community in Pueblo, New Mexico. Roxanne Swensel, who's a farmer but also is an artist, they, over the course of 6 months, it's an indigenous community, only ate what is known as pre-contact food. So food before colonialism hit them. So foods like, again, like the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, but also amaranth, also rabbit, also elk, and other things that they could hunt. And they did this experiment with medical practitioners working with this community of about 35 people to kind of test whether their health would be impacted. And over the course of 6 months, some of them came into the experiment with some, big problems, being diabetic and other cardiovascular diseases, and they found that there was changes. Now, again, this is not necessarily causation, as you were saying, but there's something about these kinds of foods that are sitting differently with this community. And one of the things that Roxanne always says is that go back into your own ancestry and figure out what your people were eating. That might probably be the best thing that fits with you. Yeah. And even if you come from multiple places, the mix of these two things might make sense.
So, Sara, everything that you laid out there has got to be by definition organic, correct?
Well, that's a very good point. So, of course, organic is not a new thing, right? So organic kind of came into existence in the early, middle of the last century as a movement against some of the chemicals that were coming out of World War II. And with the kind of counter movement, the environmental movement, the first Earth Days and so forth that kind of took place, there were more and more farmers that were resisting this more industrialized farming system and were saying, we farm differently. We farm without pesticides, without chemicals, without genetically modified crops. And so standards started getting created around the United States across different states. So Vermont would have its standards, California had its standards. And a carrot in Vermont might be considered organic, but you go into California and it's not. And so what happened in the late 80s was, okay, we need to create a concerted effort of what organic means for this whole country. And so actually my boss, Kathleen Merrigan, who's the person who put together this bill, the Organic Farm Bill, that was eventually passed, Organic Food Production Act, that was eventually passed in 1990, tried to standardize what organic is.
And just so, real quick, is everybody aware that the author of the U.S. Organic Food Bill is faculty here at ASU? This is the kind of power that we have amongst our faculty here. It's pretty awesome. Kathleen Merrigan, look her up.
She's currently in DC with our students to actually try and bring the next generation of our students to do this kind of work. So we have about 35 students right now going to meet people who are have today passed the farm bill in the House to meet these people and hopefully become the next generation. So yes, thanks for saying that. But just to give a little bit of context, what organic did is create a standard of what organic means. So that is a certification that is regulated by the USDA that says that anything that is organic meets these specific standards, which is non-synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, non-genetically modified, no sewage sludge, no irradiation. And it requires a third party, which I'm sure Matt doesn't love, a third party to come in and make sure that what you say in your records is truly that. Now, this kind of goes against traditional farming and goes against, this community of producers, but it is the way that we can ensure that that label is truly true to what it says it is. Yeah.
So Matt, you've been an organic farmer, a certified organic farmer now for how long?
For 4 years.
How long has your family essentially been trying to farm by the organic standards, though, beyond the certification?
So, not really before that.
Okay.
Because, there's a lot of information put out and like, when synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides first kind of came on the scene, there was pushback against it, right? But now they don't know better. Like literally, I've been in ag conferences where Roundup is pushed as like the safest chemical ever made. Now, I'm going to pause there because Roundup, which is glyphosate, which is a herbicide, so it is used to control weeds, is one of the safest chemicals for that job that's ever been made. Like if you go back to the 80s and the 70s and some of the stuff that was being sprayed on our crops.
Essentially napalm.
Yeah, like it's horrid, right?
Yeah.
So from a farmer today who uses Roundup, he's like, yeah, my grandpa died because of this particular kind of cancer from WD-40, or you talk to a Vietnam vet like Agent Orange, which is WD-40. It's horrible stuff, right? So Roundup, glyphosate, is a super concentrated salt. And, the fertilizer people will like drink it in front of you and be like, see, it's safe, You
check back in 10 years.
Yeah. Well, but that's the thing is, so it's the information being given, and from a farmer's perspective, spraying Roundup once or twice a year is way more cost effective than running a cultivator through your crop 8 to 10 times a year, especially with $5.50, $6 diesel fuel.
So what made you guys decide to change?
Because we wanted to eat our own food.
Can you get a T-shirt that says that? That's as good a marketing thing as I've ever heard.
We want to eat our own. We want to eat what we grow, right? And my dad, we dairied. So originally we were from Nebraska and we moved down here in '98, and we dairied before then. And my dad's dream was always to send a product out the driveway that's as close to being ready to eat as we can. So then it was milk. Like you can drink milk directly from the cow, and it's the best way to drink milk. So we dairied. And out here, we didn't have that opportunity. And we actually met another farmer, Dax Hansen, and he kind of turned us on to this idea. And 4 years ago, we ran with it.
So in those 4 years, what have been the biggest challenges that you've run into to get to where you are now? And what are you continuing to face?
So the biggest challenge in that going from non-organic to organic is finding a market that makes it sustainable. So right now you can go, the commodity price for non-organic wheat is 15 cents a pound. You cannot grow wheat for 15 cents a pound. So the only way you can have any sort of hope of making a profit is by growing thousands of acres of it, spraying it with different things so that you don't have to go out and pull weeds, or so it's really clean, using lots of synthetic fertilizer to get the yield up and the protein high and all these things, so that you can hopefully eke out a percentage out of that 15 cents a pound wheat. Well, when you grow organic wheat, unless you have contracts, unless you work your tail off and go find people who are willing to buy directly from you, the big commercial people that buy wheat, they might give you 20 or 25 for your organic wheat. Well, you can't grow organic wheat for 25 cents a pound. You cannot do it because you don't get the yield. And we're growing heritage varieties, which don't yield as much as, say, an Alberto variety. So like it's making that switch when there is no market. You literally have to pioneer the market. So for us, it took us 3 years to figure it out. And finally, my dad was like, I'm done. You take this horse and run with it. And God's been good to us. And this year's the first year we have all of our harvest under contract.
That's fantastic. So let's turn to somebody who's creating that market for you, Don. How have all of these factors that have been laid out in front of you influenced how you decided to prepare food? I mean, that's essentially what you're doing. And why has it been so impactful to you that you're going around and essentially proselytizing to the world about it?
Yeah, what I've done is sort of a response to the market. I started in my garage. Before that, I had a large company, so I went with a company of 40 employees, 2 locations, down to 1 person. That was me, the baker in the garage. But I started because there was a regular shipment, so my supply was not what I needed to be. I was working with a bigger broker. They would say, sorry, your flour isn't there, it'll come soon. And to me, that was a problem. So right away, I started to think about, I needed to change my supply chain. Miraculously, it happened. I started working on a grant with Native Seed Search to plant chapalote corn and white Sonoran wheat. That was a model for what could be. As soon as made the first loaves of Sonoran wheat loaves, boom, I saw 10 years in the future what it would be, working with farmers, seed scientists, seed savers, recruiting seed that were arid adapted. It all just hit very quickly. I stayed in the garage at the pace of the grow. So each year I had about 2 new varieties to work with. I would advise the farmers, I need something, hard wheat, I need these sort of pigments, because that's what you do in your artisan baker. You work not only with the flavor that the seed can express through fermentation, but also pigmentation. So how do I paint the Sonoran sunset onto my racks of bread? All these different varieties. So I started to think, this is exciting and fun. But what I realized is there is so much to this. So not only was it sort of these sort of personal, greedy, ideas that I could have this and I could work with this, but what it did, it grew a grain economy. And I realized working with all these people inside my supply chain, my grain chain, is we kept the economics local. I started to see that. I worked with farmers that were doing contract that would ship to Italy. The pasta would come back to us. I asked them, wouldn't it be amazing if we can keep that grain local? They said yes. They signed up. BKW Farm is one of the first farmers I started to work with. It happened there. So I was a response to that market. But I also realized through the nutritional benefits, working with ancient and heritage grains, they have a totally different protein structure. So we talked about indigenous foods, how they can be better for you because they're not changed, they're unmodified, or they haven't been bred as much. So working with breads, you see some bread out here, some einkorn. I work with spell. I work 13 to 16 varieties depending on the year right now. But they all have different nutritional benefits, but starting with a different structure. So they haven't been modified, which means low inflammatory to you. So people eating Barrio Breads, low inflammatory grain, you notice right away through the fermentation with sourdough, but because it hasn't been hybridized, that's also a factor. So to me as a baker and artisan, I'm working with some of the the most amazing grain that you can get through a sourdough process, which I've been working on 35 years, and I can make a bread that's highly digestible, bread without glyphosate. And we see this, how digestible it is. And my research is just asking, right? I'm not a scientist. I may be a bread scientist, right? But this is what I love to study and just do that research organically. How do you feel? I've had patients that are going through chemo who just pound down my door, especially when I was in the garage, tell me it's the only food that their body will accept. The first time I turned someone away, I said, I do not sell from my garage. She came back 3 times, and then I asked her why. And she told me, and I just about broke down. I ran out and grabbed a bag, filled it with breads. I gave it to her, and I learned it is good, clean food. So this opened this box of amazing things for me to talk about, from economics, the development of gastronomy in my region, making regional bread and using regional grains. But my response initially started with supply chain, which is something I love to study because I'm also an anthropologist. So studying how I can really tighten up my supply chain, like Matt talked about his passion. To me, it's farmer, miller, baker. Right now we have a system, farmer, miller, baker, brewer, distiller, pasta maker, but recruiting more people into the fold to really grow this movement. So to me, it's what started out as just gathering these grains for me to make bread has turned into supporting total community, a regional, and now a national coalition, which I'm working on too. So that's my angle on everything, but it's been fun, and now meeting these professionals that can really further the research, working with ASU, can really open this up as a discussion as food is wellness. Might say food is medicine, but food is wellness because it hits from this cultural, these other societal components come into it, but it's also the nutrition and the artistry that can be shared. So we have bread making in this community for years, the farming, the growing of the grains, the processing with Hayden flour mills, the milling, and the knowledge of baking. So this is what I do, bread education, to keep that alive and well.
I'd like you to kind of dig in a little bit more on the education of baking, because that has been such an intentful part of your career.
Correct.
As a baker. I mean, you've talked everything about supply chain and the economics of actually running a bakery, but one of the things that I've really admired and been able to see historically is you've given almost equal time to taking your knowledge out to people, be it at universities, community centers, international
preschools.
Yeah, preschools.
Which I will have a class on Monday.
I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong. You traveled to South Korea and to Poland to talk to culinary people about baking. So, dig into a little bit about why that is so important, because you've seen a level of success that many other people have tried using these ingredients that they have not seen the same level of success. How has the education component played into that?
Well, being a U of A College of Ed grad,
We're going to
has
skip
really
that.
opened some doors, right? I know, I'm from Tempe, so I could say it, right? But, having the education degree really gave me a different look on my business model. So my business model, the strongest component is outreach education. This has been something has been dear to me because as an educator, I am sort of graded. My evaluations are based on how well my students are doing. Now my classroom has grown. Now working with the university, working with national organizations and global organizations around, grain growing and bread making, it's really opened up. But I believe in sharing that knowledge. What I do, there's no secrets. I say there's no secrets. The sourdough starter is given away free at both my bakeries. Yeah, she's been one of my students. But the teaching is what is needed, the sharing of knowledge with open hands. If your fists are closed here, you can't give or receive, right? So with open hands, this has been shared, but it's open doors, like an avalanche of support. I am here. I am at ASU as a baker in residence because it started that way. So the legacy for me would be all those things, a continuation with or without me. And I truly believe in what we're all doing here, from the research, the policy, to the grain growing. This is what's needed to change the diet so we can avoid some of these neurodegenerative diseases that are going to be quickly approaching our total population rapidly, right? We see this. So if we can do our part to buffer some of this, these issues, this is what I want to do with my time. But it starts with the breaducation. I call it breaducation, right? And Bread Without Borders. I've been traveling the globe, thanks to UNESCO sponsoring my trips to share the information. But what I realized globally, I went to Poland, right? And I'm thinking, this is grain growing and bread making with these ancient heritage wheats have been going on for years and years, and it's never stopped. What I learned, they changed just as we did in the 1950s when Industrial Revolution. There was a pause. They took a big break. When I went there, I'm working with bakers that are saying, we're doing the same thing. And I was one of 20 bakers that were invited to that trip to talk about this re-renaissance of bread and re-renaissance of ancient heritage, small-scale farming. So it's not something that's local, but it is a hyper-local model that has global adoption. That's what I learned.
So Sara, you qualified earlier, you're not a food expert per se, but you are a policy expert per se, but you are a food expert that has policy implications. There's the news that broke today about the food bill at least passing through the House. Can you speak a little bit about how policy decisions are impacting consumers' ability to access these foods, like what Don's making using Matt's ingredients, and what the implications of this farm bill are kind of saying?
So the Farm Bill just passed through the House. It still needs to get to the Senate and then maybe come back. So this is a long process. And I mean, one only gain in our conversation is that there was a clause for the not keeping Bayer and Monsanto, these kind of pesticide companies, liable. They've removed that clause right now from the Farm Bill. And so there's a little bit of a gain in that space. But unfortunately, organic takes up a really small space in kind of like USDA's overall budgets and finances. And it's unfortunate because there's, the research out of USDA and other trade associations says that actually there is an increase in demand of organic, like the millennials and especially Gen Z are constantly requesting it. 92% is the number of people in the United States Americans consume 92% of Americans consume organic at some point in the year. The sales of organic keep going up. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is not coming from the US. And that has a lot to do with how the policies are organized in supporting and subsidizing the food system. So, about $140 billion will be invested over the next 10 years on food programs out of USDA. The only program that really gives money to farmers to support them in the organic space is a cost share program, which allows you to, and Matt didn't know about this program, and it tells you a lot, allows you to get reimbursed for 75% of your certification or up to $750. And there's only $8 million in that program. That's the only thing that exists. So we're talking about nothing. And so really, organic is not supported as much. We are at the Swette Center part of a mentorship program that was a pilot project that was meant to be a 5-year project. It got cut short for 1 year to try and match up mentors, people like Matt, with people wanting to transition and to go through the certification process and understand what it takes to be organic, but it got cut short. And so there's a big struggle in that space. However, I will say there's still also some positive things. I mean, right now, social media plays a big role, and you have these MAHA influencers that are at DC right now trying to fight against all these glyphosate rulings, be it the executive order that Trump passed to kind of support the Bayer industry, or the Supreme Court ruling, or even, they were also talking about the Farm Bill. So it's important for us to have a voice, I think, like what you're saying, to have this ground up movement of people that actually fight for this. This is what happened in Europe. GMOs are a big no for Europeans, and it has to do with people who said that this is not what they really want. And so I think this is a big part of it. I think where we could be hopeful, you just referred to food as medicine. Food as medicine is gaining traction. There's about $200 million that got passed by a bipartisan bill that will support more food as medicine programs. And so the ability for people to create prescription produce and maybe bread, prescriptions or things like that, that the research will support more of that moving forward. So we just need to be smart about how we maybe pivot, because currently there isn't too much that supports organic the way we want it.
So I just want to go back and clarify. You said of that 92% of Americans who have eaten organic at some point over the course of a year, the majority of that organic food is coming from outside of the U.S.?
No, it's not the majority, but there is a very large percentage. And one of the things that we're trying to do with this transition to organic partnership program is to have more American grown.
Yes.
And that's not simple.
So Matt, as a producer, how do you react to that?
I'm not surprised.
Are you frustrated, I would hope, though?
Well, being a farmer for as long as we have, we've realized the solution never comes from the top. Okay, so the farm bill passing, I didn't know about it until she told me.
Actually, none of us knew. It happened to be one of my colleagues, my supervisor came in and said, farm bill passed, you going to talk about it? So we are.
Yeah, but I mean, that does so little for us as the farmer. If you're growing corn or soybeans or cotton, maybe it'll subsidize and you'll get a good shot in the arm for it. But it does so little. So I hear of all these things and I'm like, okay, that's a cool, but that's going to move the needle. No offense to anybody working in that industry, but it's going to move the needle so little. You know what moves the needle way more is you people, the consumer, okay? And what we need is the consumer and the farmer and the baker and the miller to have relationships, and you come and directly buy from us. And that's what's going to move the needle, okay? And I think education or breaducation is a huge part of that. And she was talking. We were talking in the entryway, and she was saying she can go on and on and on, and I could for a long time. But I do want to explain something because I get this a lot from people who have no idea what farming even consists of anymore, right? Everybody's idea. I had the youth pastor at our church reach out to me. He's like, I want to work on a farm. I've never worked on a farm. I want to come work on a farm. And I'm like, okay, what do you want to do? You want to fix tractors? Do you want to clean ditches? Do you want to chop weeds? What does he want to do? So people have this idea of old McDonald's farm. I want to go and I want to do all the morning chores with you and I want to milk the cow and it's just that doesn't work that way anymore, right? So not to jump on the glyphosate thing, but I think it's important to understand for the consumer what is going on, okay? Now, I grew up in the Midwest. The Midwest number one crop is corn and soybeans, right? And Roundup Ready corn and Roundup Ready soybeans is pretty much what everyone is growing. Don't hate the farmer for that, because that's the only thing he can afford to grow, okay? Does anybody here have an idea what a new combine costs? How much?
So I'm also from the Midwest, Iowa. My family is industrial corn and soy growers. But new combine can be over.
Yeah. And just a side note on that, 1/3 of that is the retarded emissions control systems.
I was going to say the computer systems inside these
No,
combines.
not the computer, just the emissions.
But the emissions, but
Yeah.
the technological systems of these combines
Yeah.
rival some of the technological systems we have in our laboratories.
Yeah.
I mean, it's complex
So
stuff.
They're crazy. But so when you spray corn and soybeans with Roundup, this is the distinction I want to make. And I made this, and somebody videoed me and posted it on Instagram. So you may have seen some of this already. When you spray Roundup over soybeans or over corn, there is no crop, there is no grain or no soybean on that plant at that time. Okay, so when it's corn can be sprayed from like when it has 4 leaves until the time the flag leaf starts to come out the top. Now the flag leaf is where the tassel comes from, okay? And at that point, there is no ear of corn on the stalk. So there is no Roundup being sprayed on the crop, okay? Now, that plant can absorb part of that. That can end up in your food, okay? Same with soybeans. It's not being sprayed on the bean pod. It's being sprayed on the ground trying to kill the weeds, okay? Because we're trying to, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to control the weeds. Where this applies to bread is most of the grain grown in the United States or in the Americas is grown in the plains of the Dakotas and Canada. Well, when they go to harvest their wheat, it's summer. And what is it doing in the summer in the Midwest and in Canada? It's raining a lot. So that plant won't dry down enough to harvest. So what do? They spray the plant with Roundup or glyphosate to kill the plant so they get an even dry so they can combine the wheat. What's been so beneficial about growing wheat in Arizona, in the Southwest, is what is it doing in June in Arizona?
We don't know. We're inside.
Yeah, it's very hot, right? The only thing we have to do to get even our farmers that grow commercially grown wheat, the only thing they have to do to get it to dry down is stop watering it, which at that point they're very happy to do because it's expensive, right? So that's why a lot of people probably don't know this, but a large percentage of the wheat grown in Arizona goes to Italy to make pasta. So everybody's like, oh, I traveled to Italy and I was able to eat their pasta and it didn't bother me and da, da, da. It's like, I grew that wheat, right? Like I grew that wheat and it goes there and they're like, really? Yeah. So I want to encourage. It comes back, yeah. But I want to encourage the consumer to start to demand this kind of stuff. Demand his bread. Go buy his bread. Like, there's other bakers, like what I would love to see, and maybe there's a brilliant college student that's going to listen to this. What we need is an Amazon for local food. That's literally what we need. And it would work. Then you could come buy from him, or you could come buy from me, you could make your own food, and that would have real impact change that the bureaucrats in Washington could only dream of.
Can I add a small thing?
Yeah, please.
100% agree with all what you're saying. Farmers really, it's a real struggle for sure, 100%. But I don't think that policy should be ignored though. And one of the things that, for example, has been useful is programs that support local food production. So maybe you were involved with the local food procurement program where there was funding that supports food that moves from small producers to school districts, to food pantries, to food banks. And without this kind of funding, it would not happen. And so you're right that the consumer needs to play a big role and that we need to support a local food production, but also policies do play a role in making these bridges that sometimes just don't happen.
So Ramon, let's get back to the bottom line.
Can I actually just make
Yeah, please.
So one of the things, and these are all excellent points, and I really appreciate it. It's been great to hear from your perspective. One of the things that comes up all the time when we talk about our research is, okay, so we should all go organic. Who can afford that, right? So you now have a socioeconomic problem, right? And I think that should definitely be brought into the conversation, because how do you make it affordable? And that's one of the things that really attracted me to the conversation we had with Don and Oren and Barrio Bread, when they talk about our bread is made in a way where we're trying to make it affordable so everyone can purchase it. So I think that's also very, very important.
So getting back to the bottom line that we started off with, talk about that gut-brain connection. What is that thing that everything that's just been laid out, why does it matter to our brains, and what is it that we can learn to change about ourselves?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So a lot of what we're focusing on now in our work and what's coming out is the impact that a lot of these exposures to pesticides have from foods, for example, and what they do to your gut, right? So the gut, as we know, has a set of bacteria within it that's critically in producing a lot of really the fundamental blocks that are important for our brain. And when those are dysregulated, you actually have a lot of processes that are dysregulating your brain and ultimately can lead to a lot of this dysfunction that you see in a lot of disorders like Alzheimer's disease, for example. And in the realm of glyphosate, I'm going to bring that up because that's the pesticide that we focus on, herbicide, yeah, the most widely used. It is known that there is a set of bacteria in your gut that is particularly perturbed by glyphosate, right? So the reason why glyphosate was deemed safe when it was first produced in the 1970s and then after the GMOs is because the idea is that we as humans and mammals do not have the pathway that it acts on that is known as the shikimate pathway. However, bacteria do. And where do bacteria live? In our gut, and they produce a lot of the fundamental blocks that are necessary for brain function. So a lot of the work that we're now trying to focus on is how does that glyphosate impact the gut, and can that perturb these various aspects that then accelerate or lead to neurological dysfunction? And that's really where the field is headed. The other component, I think that you really hit this spot on, is what is the alternative? Glyphosate actually, compared to all the other things, is actually pretty safe, right? And I say that as a anti-glyphosate researcher, because that's what I am. The problem is that we need to understand at what level may it not be inducing some of these changes that are detrimental to mammalian species, right? So if you look at Europe, for example, and other countries, their tolerable level, that is what one can be exposed to per day, is different than the United States. So in the United States, you're allowed 1.75 milligrams per kilogram per day of glyphosate. In Europe, it's 1.0 milligrams per kilograms per day. Why is that? They're basing it off the same research. It's because they understand that having those higher doses may lead to more detrimental outcomes.
So is there also, it seems, based on everything that we've heard, currently it's inescapable to avoid glyphosate. What can we do to improve our, fight with this thing?
So I think looking at organic diets is definitely one thing that we can do. Many products that we all consume, unfortunately, are going to have glyphosate. And one of the facts is that 90% of Americans have glyphosate circulating in their body at any given time. So we're all exposed to it. And we're also exposed to it through drinking water, for example, right? So glyphosate's half-life is really, really high. When you look at the average half-life, the published range is from couple hours to years, because it's not really identified. It depends what it's saturating and what it's in. If it's soil, if it's tissue, if it's other, other components. Organic diets could potentially help. But if we're drinking water, and once again, if one is going to a full organic diet and relying on that farm being full organic, where are they getting their water from? It rains, right? They can't prevent that. So I think the focus, and that's what we're focused on, is not necessarily saying glyphosate is just completely bad, let's get rid of it. At what level might it be okay? And at what level do we start to actually see that it might induce some of these changes that can lead to these risk factors, the risk of developing disorders like Alzheimer's disease?
Awesome, thank you. Let's have some questions. Let me get up.
Forgotten everybody's name, but where do you sell your product? I mean, I can go into Safeway, Fry's, any one of the markets, and they always say organic. So it looks like there's a ton of organic food to buy. Are you supplying any of the large chains?
Not supplying some of the large chains at this time. At my bakery in Tucson, Barrio Bread. Here in Gilbert, Barrio Bagel and Slice. Currently, the bakery, commissary bakery that used to produce breads here in the valley is inside Hayden Flour Mills. So I have access to the fresh milled flour all day long, which is beautiful. But Gilbert Farmers Market would be another chance to pick it up. And through restaurants in the valley, in some marketplaces. But right now it's sort of a small scale, considering there's other producers that are much bigger.
But we see, there's whole walls full of organic. Is it all really organic, and where are they getting that? And
Well, for one thing, bread is, even though it's organic, might not be the same nutritive properties. So the bread that I'm producing is natural leaven, meaning I'm using microbes, wild yeast and bacterial microbes that leaven the bread. So it's traditional bread making, thousands and thousands of years old. So using these microbes to leaven the bread, they create enzymes when the pH falls. Those enzymes basically break down starches and proteins, and that's why this bread is low inflammatory. So creating enzymes to break those nutrients down, so your body, once you eat the bread, that process of stripping away to get at the nutritive parts of the grain have been done by these little organisms, the smallest ones, right? So it lands on your body, and it's just flavorful, it's highly digestible, and it gives you energy rather than make you feel bad. And the inflammation is really from your body trying to get at those centers of nutrition. But the bread you see that might be organic at the stores might contain sugar, might be flash leaven with baker's yeast. They cannot lower the pH down far enough to create those really amazing properties that this style of bread has, which I've been researching for, I said 35 years or so.
But as a farmer, what's your distribution point?
So right now, we are selling all of our wheat directly to people like Barrio Bakery. So that we have 2 contracts. I don't want to mention his competition right here, but
I have no competition.
yeah. So okay, the other one is Proof Bakery, right? They have like 7 locations throughout the valley. They have 2 areas where they actually are baking the bread, and it's great stuff. And they get the same people come in, and they're like, I haven't been able to eat bread in like 20 years, and I can eat your bread, and it doesn't bother me. And what I want to also point out is a lot of people that are supposedly tolerant to gluten. They're like, oh, I have a gluten intolerance. Well, you may just have a yeast intolerance, and you also may just have a glyphosate intolerance. So that's some of the biggest things. Whereas, but like what we were talking about with the heritage varieties is, if I should have brought some, but if you take a handful of commercially grown wheat, it's a fairly big kernel. If you take a kernel of white Sonoran, it's much smaller. And these have been bred over time to try to create a higher yield so you can offset the lower price. So that was the way farmers could try to get ahead, is let's make more yield. So let's get a crop that makes a bigger kernel so it can have more weight. And it's created a higher gluten content in the wheat. Now, Desert Sonoran Natural Foods, we do have a website. It's not done yet. I'm sorry. And she was telling me, you got to push that you're organic. You don't even have it on there. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry. But yeah, that's the thing, is like, man, we're trying to make a living, but once we have that up and going, you will be able to go in there and order. It'll be local. Like, we're not trying to ship to, Timbuktu. But you'll be able to order like 10-pound buckets of wheat or 20-pound buckets of wheat, or if you're really industrial, baker, you want to get 50 pounds, you'll be able to do that. But right now, I would just encourage you to support these local bakeries. Get on Instagram and search sourdough, and you'll have like 40 things pop up. There's tons of these little cottage bakeries. I bet you there's one in your community. Support them.
And Matt and Don, there's a step that you've mentioned a couple times that also is producing and selling goods, the miller. Hayden Mills, you can find their products at AJ's, at places like that, correct?
Or order online, they send it home.
Yeah, you can. I know you can order from them online. They'll ship it, that kind of stuff. That's a great place to start.
Can I just add something about the hundreds of shelves of organic now? This is actually because of consumers. So the Costco's and the Fry's of the world 8-9 years ago did not have that much produce that's organic, but because there's a demand for it, it's increased. However, who are they buying it from? They're getting it from the larger producers, from Mexico, from overseas. And so the next step in the demands that consumers have to make is then, how do we bring in the local ones as well? So just to explain that didn't come out of nowhere. It came because consumers wanted it.
Yeah, really nice, great discussion. I guess I'm curious about we talked about the Farm Bill, and I'm curious about the role of subsidies kind of in general in driving some of these dynamics. When we think about the corn and soy, a lot of that's driven by the meat industry actually, right? Because that ends up being food for the dairy cows and just eating meat. So I don't know, just like I'm an ecologist, so I think about how all these things are connected. It's like the choices that we're making as consumers are not just limited to organic bread. It's like, it's all kind of one big thing. And if we were to shift subsidies to another thing that was more aligned with people's values, how do you see that changing things?
And that's what I was trying to get to with the fact that there's only $8 million that are allocated for that cost share program. That's the only thing that actually supports organic producers in comparison to $140 billion that will be spent over the next 10 years in subsidies and programs and so forth. That is entirely the problem. If we had a shift that actually helps a farmer go through that transition period, which is expensive because they have to pay a third-party certifier to come and verify the work that they're doing, that would make a huge difference. And what I was trying to allude to is that there's an interest in it. There's a huge demand for the organic, but people can't afford it, like you were saying. Like the economies just don't add up. But that's because it's tilted, because on the other side, there is a lot of lobbying and a lot of money, a lot of subsidies being put into other commodity crops. And so it's not actually a fair comparison. You're saying organic is much more expensive to the consumer, but it's actually, in reality, if you were to go and calculate the cost of a McDonald's hamburger, it wouldn't actually cost the $3 that they're selling it at. But because this industry is subsidized, it probably costs more like $10 or $11, You can't do the same thing in the organic space because there isn't that kind of subsidy.
So I think a thing to notice, so when I say the consumer needs to really push this, I think if we're not careful, if we go in and policy and change, like, okay, we're not gonna subsidize corn and soybeans at all, we're gonna have a famine, okay? Because there's way too many people in this world for me to feed the way I'm farming. If every farmer that I know in Buckeye switched and started farming the way I did, there were still not enough people growing food. So we can't completely drop the way we're doing it now. We need to have the consumer drive it. Like she was saying, years ago in Fry's or Costco, there was no organic option, right? The regular stuff wasn't as bad as it is now either. So, but so what I'm saying is let's do this carefully, or we're going to have a famine on our hands, and that we definitely don't want to see. But if the consumer makes these demands and drives these demands, the meat industry is a whole nother ugly mess, right? And we don't have time to go into that. But I I do want to try to be a balanced voice in this space, because what I hear is like, no, we need to all go this way. And then the other one's like, no, what we're doing is fine. Man, if we go from one side of the road to the other side of the road in your vehicle, like what do you end up? You end up on your top, right? And we don't want that. So that's why I push, I'm grateful for the work that you're doing to try to get that going. But I really push, hey, let's let the consumer push it so that we don't end up upside down.
All right, we got time for one more question.
This is a question for Ramon, if you don't mind. Pardon me, but I thought when you talked about the half-life of glyphosate, it was really, really interesting. But there's a study you did that I totally fascinated me, and it was 6 months post-cessation from glyphosate. And just to go over the results, because it wasn't just glyphosate you saw, but something called AMPA, and I'm hoping you could elaborate what that is.
Sure.
And last one, my second question, I promise, is what do you speculate that glyphosate's effect on the aging process? Does it accelerate aging? Does it have no effect on like optimal aging? So anyways.
So two great questions. So the first question, yeah. So one of the things that we've been investigating and, isn't really well known is that glyphosate, when it becomes metabolized, it's metabolized into what is known as aminomethylphosphonic acid. That's why we call it AMPA for short. And AMPA is just as toxic, if not even more toxic than glyphosate itself. And what we're finding is, and typically you do find it at lower levels because it's the metabolite of glyphosate. But the study that William was alluding to was a study that we found where we actually exposed animals to glyphosate, and we did so only for 13 weeks, and then we took them off glyphosate for 6 months completely. And we said, well, if glyphosate is just supposed to be excreted out of your body, there should be no detrimental outcomes. Well, we looked at their brains and in their blood. Glyphosate wasn't present, but AMPA was. So that's, yet another problem, that the metabolite for some reason was found in the brain and it's not able to be removed. And it also increased the inflammation that, Don's been talking about, inflammation in the brain. And in animal models that develop Alzheimer's, it actually accelerated that. So one point is that, okay, glyphosate might be doing these things immediately, but what about decades from now? So your point about these individuals that drink Roundup and are like, look, I'm fine. Yeah, I would ask the question, how do they, 10 years and see what's going on with their brain and their gut and everything, and all those components. Second of all, one of the things that we're actually looking now at is vulnerability. Are there certain individuals that have more vulnerability, sensitivity to these given pesticides, right? So if we know there's someone that has an increased risk of developing a neurodegenerative disorder, right? And I'll give an example. You can have what's called the ApoE4 gene allele that increases your risk for Alzheimer's disease. It's not a definite diagnosis, but it just increases the risk by anywhere from 3 to 15-fold, depending if you have 1 copy or 2 copies. Well, we are trying to understand, are those individuals more sensitive to glyphosate or these other pesticides than those that are not? Because if that's the case, then the scale shouldn't just be one scale. It should be more personalized for the given, all the given individuals. So it's a very complicated story. And once again, going back to what Matt was saying, I agree. What is the alternative? What do we do to get rid of these pesticides that allow us to have products that we need to survive, right? And I think really understanding, okay, at what level do you kind of hit that tipping point of this is actually inducing these things is what we're focused on doing, and I think what the field is trying to do.
So ultimately, support local.
Yes, 100%. Yes, because it's also very delicious.
Yeah.
I will say the Barrio Bread is really good.
Bread's one of those things, if it's great, it tastes amazing. If it's not, it tastes like nothing. Sara, Don, Matt, Ramon, thank you all so very much. It was just awesome. Thank you.